So, let's take a brief look at what is policy. I don't really want to go into much depth here because I'm just going to give you a working definition, mainly because we talked about it last week and we're going to use, I've already said we're going to use that definition, but as a quick summary of some of the things that I said last week, I just want to bring you back up to speed with what I mean by policy. Bring us all up to speed, I should say. All right. Some common ways that I've seen it interpreted as well. Policy is rules or problems. Rules and instructions. I was looking at the next slide. You can do that when you're the presenter. I should just look up here. Rules and instructions. Does anyone know what the word heuristics means? If you haven't heard that before, some people might have. It's like a guideline, a rule of thumb. So this is something you'll follow. Like, this is how you do this. Okay, so policy is very much a heuristic. It's designed to limit decision making into certain capacities or certain channels that you will make certain kinds of decisions, and these are the basic aspects we expect you to use. What governments don't do, or do in some cases, legislation is part of policy. Information policy, okay, as we defined last week, access, use to information. Are there any other definitions of policy that you've come across? There's tons, actually. Any others? Ways, models of behaviour? So there's a lot, and we'll cover it in a little bit more depth as the semester rolls on. But these are the general sort of guidelines you get from most readings. That, look, it is a heuristic, it's rules, it's instructions, but it also depends on the context, because if you're in a highly autocratic organisation, the rules are very important. Okay, and I really wish I had more time to explain that. But, as we said in the last section, policy solves a problem. So we're going to look at that in a little bit more depth and look at a basic model of problem solving. It's my hobby horse, but I think it's useful to do that in this instance, to show you the way in which information, so, we're sort of repeating ourselves a little bit here. We can summarise this view of policy solving a problem in that information policy presents information problems, or another way around, probably the best way to say it would be information problems present the need for information policy. So the way that we look at it, especially from this week's reading, they hone in on this need to say, look, well, policy can be proactive and reactive, but it really, an information policy problem is a problem in itself. And the idea that policy should encompass some kind of solution means that we can think of it in that angle. We can look at it and say, look, information policy solves an information problem. Okay? So that's what we're trying to achieve. Now really, judging the efficacy or the usefulness of policy doesn't come down to statements like this. We have to evaluate it. So let's look at three ways. This is from the literature in the 70s, just briefly. Let's look at three ways in which people solve problems in organisations. So this is quite a simple list, but it's interesting in that it summarises most of the known approaches to policy making as well, which is a coincidence. All right, absolution. We can absolutely do nothing about our problems. We can do nothing. Tom and I had a good conversation about that before we came to class. Problem comes along, you choose to ignore it. Now what's the likely outcome of that? Will the problem go away? Potentially, yeah, it can. Most of the time, probably not. But there's sometimes, like in World War II, if you study some of the fighting that went on there, some of the generals practiced this absolution thing to a T and actually won major battles. There'd be two minor battles going on. The general will be watching thinking, we would like to win this battle. When this battle's finished, we'll come in and we'll take the land. Now, that's absolution, but in some cases it's the best answer. It means that it comes from the word to absolve, okay, which means basically to do nothing, to sit around and do nothing. Now this would be the one that you're all familiar with if you've ever studied negotiation or if you've ever looked into resolution or mediation techniques. Problem resolution has to do with reaching what they call a consensus, or to accommodate different worldviews. I've got update that a little bit. The word accommodate does not mean consensus, I should say. The word accommodate means we learn to live with each other. Okay, like you have to accommodate a flatmate. If somebody comes to your house and they're obnoxious and you can't get rid of them, you have to accommodate them until they leave. Okay, that's where the saying comes from, not like a house. Okay, you just live in a house. But it does relate to that word in a lot of ways. So when you're resolving issues or policy issues, quite often people fall back on resolution because it's the easiest and quickest thing to do. You know you can't do nothing. But the quickest thing to do is trying to get people to agree on the definition of a problem. Okay? And we just get them to agree, we build consensus or we accommodate, and we negotiate through the process. The third one is dissolving problems. So this is changing conditions so that a win-win solution is organised. It's easy to say but difficult to grasp. Conditions are changed so that the problem can't exist. Or in other words, I can renegotiate the meaning of the problem by changing how I think about it, and I can come up with different answers. Lateral thinking, we've got an exercise that hopefully we'll get to tonight. And things like, okay, instead of negotiating what the problem might be, we're going to introduce a new set of ideas, shift the concept, and try and think differently about this problem. Yes?
Imagine the dissolution if there's like a physical change that can fix the problem.
Yeah, that's right. If you didn't hear that, it was mentioned that dissolution would be if there's a physical condition that changed the problem, that brought in new ideas. It would also move the condition and change it. So we don't often get options to do that, do we? But there can be some interesting things happen when we try different ideas. Okay. So some examples of that might be, a couple of years ago they built a tunnel under the city of Brisbane to improve traffic conditions. Someone last year suggested to me that perhaps they could have had another way of managing that problem by moving work out into the suburbs. So this is what I mean. That may not be an option. It might have a requisite cost associated with it, but it's a completely different set of ideas. More on that later. Now let's get back to policy, and then we're going to get on to the second exercise. Policy is an attempt to get people to participate in problem dissolving. I think at the heart of that, people want to change the conditions. They don't want to live in a world where there's resolution. Most policymakers would freely admit, I think, and also from other examples which I'll run through in a minute, that the idea of policy is to get people to a point where the problem no longer exists. But unfortunately, policy usually is written in such a way is that it's didactic and gets people to try and just do the right thing. Tries to get people to, tries to get them to just follow the rules, because people know that at the end of that they're going to have a better answer, right? Anyway, so let's look at some examples and see what we're talking about. So policy can be a model to explain a problem early on. We might create a policy because we've noticed something's happening which we don't like, and we would prefer that if, in most cases, that the policy actually explained something that was more clear-cut to us. But we don't know what it is just yet. We're still defining the problem, so we make a bunch of rules that we try to understand, and we say, well, this doesn't make any sense, but we know that we don't want it to happen. So that's difficult, and it's hard for us to understand. And a lot of people in management, especially strategic management areas, don't realise that when they're trying to solve a problem, or they don't think of it this way, some people do, some clever people that I've met along the way do, they don't realise that they're defining something as they're making policy. So they might look back in 2 years' time and think, I would have done that differently if I had known what I know now. Anyway, policy sometimes expresses a purpose. Like acceptable use policies will tell you, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. It tells you clearly, don't do this or do this. Sometimes policy becomes a label for a field of activity or change in political circles, trying to change immigration policy or education policy. We want things to be better, so we implement a policy. We hope that the policy will bring forward this change. But as you'll see later on in the semester, as it is with strategy as well, when we implement a set of ideas, we need mechanisms to make them work. We can't just rely that it'll just be adopted. We need physical processes in place to make it happen. And then if it goes wrong, it's very hard to pull back. Policy is often defined as government decisions, as a proposal. Sometimes this is what we would like to do. You'll see politicians do that all the time. They'll come on TV and say, look, if you vote for me, I'll give you $1 million. Or if you vote for me, I'll give you better health care. So it's a proposal. And you engage with the policy on that level of, this is a proposal, this is going to make my life better. And of course, probably the one that most of us are familiar with is policy as process management, or business process management and continuity. We implement policy because we want things to remain and stay the same. Okay, we want our process to be enforced and managed through our value chain and things like that. We want things to keep going the way they are. So we implement policy as a management and measurement of process. You'll see that all the time in your working life. You'll have a certain way that you have to enter data into PeopleSoft. Okay, you have a certain way that you deal with customer relationship management systems. You'll have things that you'll have to do because it's a process and the rules are that that process has to be followed. And sometimes you'll be the person implementing that process because that's what the business wants to achieve. That'll be your business alignment strategy. Okay, you're trying to get your processes to align with your strategic goals. Now, it'd be wonderful if it was that easy, but it's not. It's fraught with difficulties. Now, let's do the next exercise. Bring you through now. Incidentally, while I'm on this matter, last semester we tried an experiment where we pre-recorded the lectures, and some of you might remember that. So we only do the exercises in class. How many people would like to try that in some of the lectures this semester? Nobody. One person. Message received. There is that option. So if you wanted to send me a line, I might put a survey in week 4 or 5 just to see if it's the way to go. I think with this kind of hands-on course is a little bit different than information management and control. So anyway, see me about that if you'd like to express an opinion. All right, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm the government and I'm here to help. It's from Ronald Reagan. Okay, so to tidy things up a little bit, let's bring it back to information policy because this is the fundamentals of information policy. We're going to wrap things up. Let's look at a model of information policy and then we'll get into the consultation time. Okay, there's different, surprise here, there's different ideas amongst academics. Here's some of the definitions that you've got out of the reading as well. So bringing the reading into the lectures, the seminar today. The parameters for controlling information. So information policy is the parameters for controlling information. Another example that I've seen from the literature or from this particular, because the reading goes through it in detail and says, look, these are the different ways you can think about information policy. Document flow, information flow. So looking at the document side of things, again, pulling up from that history of library science and information science. Distribution, collecting, receiving, retiring information. That talks about the movement of information, how information goes through the system and does all these different things along the way. So 3 different views. Some more on the next page. This is the overarching summary of the reading. There's more coming up on the next page, the next couple of slides. Definition, though, the one that we want to focus on in this course is this: a set of laws that govern information flow, control and management in organisations. Now we leave in the MIS, if you continue on, we do the control stuff. Some of you have already done it, so you'll be like, what are you talking about? But we actually do the control stuff and the management stuff in second semester. That's a lot more formal and a lot less abstract. But in this course, we're looking at the policies or the laws, and notice that this word's crept in here, govern. So governance is coming in right at the very beginning, and that's all about management and the mechanisms that make it work. So information flow, control and management in organisation. Some key words to focus on there are govern, laws, flow and management. So that's what information policy, really that's what the reading defines it as. But if you look at these different things, it's actually talking about different elements of information policy at the same time. Like controlling information, that's a controversial subject. one that we haven't broached yet. We will later on when we talk about the Stern-Hu affair in week 11. Distribution, collecting and receiving. What do we mean by that, and how do we want to restrict that? We obviously want our people to share information, but a lot of research has suggested that the more we restrict it, the less innovation comes out of our system. So we think, well, hang on, how do we then manage that appropriately with some of these parameters where we have to control certain kinds of sensitive information? All right. What's going on there? Okay. Information policy really has a context, and that's the problem. We need to separate that context out from what we mean a little bit and say things like, well, information policy is that which relates to the use of information across those contexts. So it might be different in every organization. Like in this one, we have a policy for intellectual property that suggests that if I make some invention, the university owns it, right? But if I go into the legal context and say, look, if I make an invention, that information that I have to make that invention belongs to me, and there is no way, because it's information, because it's my quote-unquote intellectual property, there's no way the university can ever say that they can have it, even though they've got a policy for that. So this is the problem, you see. In the legal case, I own all my intellectual property, but because I work for a university and they pay me to develop it, so to speak, if I was a scientist in that, it would be an invention, that I own it. It's mine. I have the right to profit from it under the law. So here's where it gets a little bit complicated. We can have policy within our organisation that conflicts the broader context. So we have to look at each context where information policy is and begin to unpack that context and think through the meaning of it. We can't just simply say, look, it's just the same everywhere we go. It's not. Organisations have different people and processes. Those processes produce different kinds of information. The reading puts a very interesting spin on it. It says, look, it will restrict or enable the flow of information. That's what information policy's job is, to restrict or enable. If we want open sharing of information, well, we make policies that enable that. If we want closed information, we don't want to have any information being shared, well, we put policies in place that completely restrict it. The other thing that we need to recognise here, this is a social thing going on. So we didn't invent systems. A lot of people believe this, you know, that we invented systems and information turned up. Okay? What we did was we started sharing information and then we built systems. So that's the difference. So we are always going to be sharing information. If that earthquake outside ever stops. God! All right. Yeah, that's right. They're trying to get out. Stay here. That's the thing from Lost. Did anyone watch Lost? It actually lives in the resonance facility. Oh, God. How can you lecture in this environment? All right. That's a lot of stuff. And that is one of the worst diagrams in history. Right? What the hell does that even mean? But look at everything that's going on. There's a lot of things going on there, right? That is, tries to fit into information policy everything that it's ever going to be about. So let's start at the top, work our way across. You could start from anywhere, literally. Well, let's start here, actually. We generate information. But someone might ask the question, do we really generate information, or do we have it already because we're using something? It's a difficult question to answer, but let's just start there. Composing, recording, reproducing, distributing, screening, selecting, storing, collection and storage, controlling access, searching, retrieving, analysing, interpretation, evaluation and synthesis, or bringing it all together. Analytics, business analytics, looking at our data that way. Now the interesting thing is there's probably no spot in this circle diagram where you couldn't start and say that's what information policy is all about. Providing access, screening, distribution. You could come into the system and say, I just want to do this, or I'm recording, or I'm creating this, I'm building my own wealth of information so I can create some kind of brokerage system, which happens often in organisations. The guy who knows the most about technical things is the most popular when it comes to the system, because they know how to crack it. All right? I know what I'm talking about. May not look like it, but retrieval, analysis, interpretation of it. So that all up here, we are now in the cognitive space. We're looking at how people think, or how they put ideas together, and how they use information in ways which we just can't begin to imagine. I was looking at a case this week of a business model where a guy basically pretends to sell an iPad on Gumtree. Is everyone familiar with Gumtree? If you're not, it's like a classified website where people sell things. I think it started in the UK, might have even started here. And what he does is he gets an ad from a pay-per-click network or a cost-per-action network, and he says, look, if you sign up to this, I'll give you, no, if you give me your email, I'll give you an iPad. So basically, people think they're answering and getting an iPad. But what they're doing is putting their email into an advertising bot that collects emails and sends them to a network overseas. So this clever sort of, bait and switch is somebody who's worked out, if I assimilate information in a certain way and make it look like this, I can make money. Totally illegal, and if you get caught doing it, you're in big trouble because it's fraud. But the interesting thing is that a lot of that goes on in organizations. People hoard information and they use it for personal advantage. Information policy covers all of this ground, is what I'm trying to say. It covers a lot of ground. Tons and tons of things happen. Okay. Let's take a bit of a look at some of the steps. Briefly. When we create information, we're composing it, and this is a social process. I just wanted to highlight that. That's not something that belongs to a machine. Machines are pretty smart, and if you talk to Abdul just around the corner here, he'll make you believe that robots can do anything. But they can't. They cannot create original, completely creative, unpreviously invented information. So in other words, a robot is not going to do that for you. One of the unique aspects of being humans is that we can see connections between things that previously weren't there. We can compose original music, we can create poetry, we can write stories, we can create interesting creative things. Yes? Don't go there. They do, but based on assumed logic, is what I'm saying. We have logic, but people probably couldn't reduce that down to an essence just yet. Although they're getting there. I could be a robot, you don't know, do you? Storage, collection, and organisation. This is where most of the work's done. Storing, collecting, and organising. What's become popular in the last 5 years is the way in which we analyse information and we pull it out into graphs and charts and whiz-bang, multi-dimensional OLAP diagrams and stuff like that. That's become very popular in analytics. It's actually become so popular that now we link it to our strategic goals. We do that here at the university. We say, look, our teaching performance is down or up, and we look at these charts and go, based on this, we need to change that, that, and that. Okay, so we use analytics that way. Who does the information affect when it gets interpreted in certain ways? Who gets left out? Who gets bracketed? Okay. We evaluate it, we synthesize it, and we disseminate it. One of the cool things about information is that there's no way of stopping it once it starts. Did anyone see what happened to Coles during the week? Wasn't that great? Did you see that? No, Coles put a thing on Twitter saying, tell us how great you think we are. And everybody bitched and moaned about how much they hate Coles. Why the hell these people think it's ever going to change? If you open yourself up like that, you have to be prepared to handle the criticism. It happened to McDonald's as well. And Qantas. Yeah, heaps to say. I was actually on a plane, the last plane out of Australia, right before it was grounded. And I was overseas thinking, geez, I hope I can get home. And it was the day I came home. I think the day before I came home, they went back in the air. I was a bit worried. It would have been a very expensive mistake. But the interesting thing, we've seen this on a grand scale now because of social media and the networks on television and the way in which people just spread things. You can look at Twitter feed, for example, one of those more modern networks, or what people do and type on their computers. It's interesting. We have access now where we can just get information out without having to go through a process. So, rapid dissemination of what, well, quote-unquote information there. So let's just summarise that now. That didn't, oh, that's actually turned out not too bad. That's default PowerPoint colours, but it's kind of weird. Anyway, so we've summarised that massive wheel diagram into 5 things, and this is what I want you to think about with information policy. Information policy is trying to do all of this at once. It's trying to understand and manage the generation of information, the organisation, so we'll talk a little bit more about that, sharing, storing and using. So that's really the way we can summarise it. If I was to say it in research term, we could say, look, they're the factors of information policy for this course, the things that we're going to look at over the next couple of weeks. Okay, especially when we talk about use, we split that up into security and talking about how information can be managed that way. When we talk about governance, we talk about organisation and sharing. Okay, organising equals governance in this case. When we go through and talk about messy problems, we're going to say, okay, what happens when this doesn't work? When we have messes and we have to reorganise and get things back into a way which we can manage them again to get this process working. And we'll talk a little bit about what happens when organisations become asynchronous or when they fall out of order and information's going in every kind of direction, like students trying to enrol or trying to change their program. You know, there's too many different areas where it's just asynchronous. It's not working together very well. That's a byproduct of having an organisation that's a hierarchy. Those of you that work in government or have worked in a bureaucratic organisation will know you can do one thing on one level that other people on other levels will never find out about if you go through certain channels, right? Just ask the program director, he'll tell you. For the MIS, he's very good at that. He's very good at it.